Welcome to The Explainer. So, today we're cracking open a really interesting document called the Code Breaker's Manifesto. Now, this thing claims to have found the secret to beating the casino. And it's not about luck. No. The whole idea here is that casino games are just machines. And like any machine, they have patterns that can be exploited. So, let's dig in and see if they've really found the key.
Okay, let's dive right in. The manifesto starts by painting this really vivid picture, right? It sets up this powerful contrast between two kinds of players. You've got the gambler on one side, the type all gut feeling, hope, and just chasing losses. And then on the other side, you have the sniper, totally different. This is someone who's all about data, patience, and waiting for the right signals.
And, this isn't just a casual comparison. The document really frames this as the core conflict of the entire system. It argues that most of us, we play like the gambler. We rely on emotion. And according to this manifesto, that's a strategy that's pretty much doomed from the get-go. So, what's the alternative? Well, that's where the sniper comes in. This isn't about guessing, not at all. The manifesto positions the sniper as this disciplined, almost professional player. Someone who waits for these hidden patterns, these signals, instead of just throwing money at the table. It's a huge mindset shift, right? It's moving away from just hoping you'll get lucky to actually executing a calculated plan.
So, what is the core problem that this whole sniper mindset is supposed to solve? Well, according to this system, it all boils down to one single critical flaw in the way most of us play.
And here it is. This is the big claim. It totally reframes the entire idea of losing. The manifesto says, look, the number one reason players lose their money isn't bad luck, it's bad timing. It's a specific error that they claim can be corrected.
And they actually outlined what this bad timing looks like. They call it the downward spiral. First, you bet too early. Then, of course, the streak runs out. From there, you start fighting the current, trying to force a win. And the end result? Your bankroll just bleeds out. They have a term for this whole predictable cycle, chasing ghosts.
Okay, so now that they've defined the problem, this very human error of bad timing, the manifesto introduces its solution. And as you might guess, it's all about taking that flawed human element out of the picture.
And this quote really gets to the heart of their whole pitch. Think about it. A casino game is a machine, right? It's running on algorithms and probability. So you can't fight a machine with your gut feeling. They say you need a machine of your own. It's a pretty compelling argument. And this machine has a name, WheelPulse Pro. They're very clear that this isn't just some simple app. It's described as a tactical dashboard. The whole idea is that it's supposed to track and visualize all the game data for you right there in front of your eyes.
And to make it sound legit, they lay out some pretty specific features. We're talking analysis of up to 1,000 spins, more than 25 different advanced strategies built right in, and even things like dealer bias and progression simulators. So yeah, they're definitely positioning this as a serious professional-grade toolkit, not just some gimmick.
But here's where it gets really interesting. They make it clear that this basic tool, it's just the beginning. The manifesto starts to build this suspense, teasing an even more powerful version, something that promises the ultimate level of insight. And they use this really dramatic language for it. They ask, but what if you want the nuclear codes? This is how they introduce this premium, almost secret level of their system. It's meant to feel exclusive, like you're getting access to something forbidding. So how did they get these nuclear codes? Well, this is the crucial point where they establish their authority. They just drop this massive number, 5 million. That's how many spins they claim to have analyzed to find these secrets. It's all about building credibility. And all that analysis, according to the source, resulted in something they call the 10 triggers. Now, these aren't just, simple trends. They're described as mathematical trapdoors. The idea is that these are specific breaking points in the game's probability, these moments where the game is vulnerable. And of course, they give these triggers these really compelling, mysterious names to build intrigue. You see things like the sleeping giant, the coin flip paradox, the 81% vacuum. It's clever marketing, right? It's designed to make you feel like you're getting access to some kind of secret, powerful knowledge.
All right, so finally, after building up all this suspense and laying out the problem and the solution, the manifesto gets to the point. It lays out a really clear path for the reader, turning this whole narrative into an actionable plan.
And here's the call to action, structured like a training regimen. Step 1, you subscribe to the basic WheelPulse Pro. Step 2, you master the tools. It's only after you've proven yourself, they suggest, that you'll be ready for the Pro Max update, the so-called nuclear codes.
So when you take a step back, what should you really take away from all this? Well, the manifesto itself is a masterclass in building a compelling story. It starts with a problem, it gives you a solution, and then it dangles this incredible vision of mastery right in front of you. Which leaves us with one final big question. Is this really a code for beating the wheel? Or is it a brilliant system for selling certainty in a game that's all about chance?
All right, let's dive into a roulette strategy that pretty much flips a common gambling instinct right on its head. It's called the sleeping giant Fibonacci strategy, and it's all about playing with discipline, not just impulse. Come on, you know the feeling, right? You see a section of a board that's gone cold, and your brain just starts screaming, it's gotta hit soon. You feel that magnetic pull to jump in, thinking, this is it, it's due.
And that right there, that gut feeling, is what this system calls the single most expensive mistake in all of gambling. It's a powerful idea, and yeah, it's completely counterintuitive. So let's actually put a name to this thing. It's called the "it's due" fallacy. And honestly, just understanding why it's a trap is the first big step to beating it. Here's the thing. Short streaks are totally 100% normal. A dozen going cold for 5, 6, even 7 spins. That's just what randomness looks like. It's just statistical noise. If you jump in and start betting then, you're not fighting a trend. You're literally fighting math itself. And that's a battle you're gonna lose. So if we're not supposed to listen to that "it's due" feeling, what's the alternative? Well, you do the hardest thing you can do in a casino. You wait. You wait to wake up the sleeping giant. This is where patience completely takes over from impulse. And this is the key difference, you guys. We're not guessing anymore. A sleeping giant isn't some hunch. It's a specific, defined statistical event. We're waiting for the wheel to create a genuine statistical anomaly, something that's actually worth our time and money. The whole philosophy boils down to these 3 simple patience steps. First, you identify the anomaly. Second, you wait for a very specific trigger. And only then, third, do you attack with a preset plan. There's no emotion, no guesswork, it's just a clean, structured ambush. So what does that attack plan actually look like? Well, it's not just about when you decide to bet, it's about how you bet. And this system uses a pretty famous mathematical sequence to do it. All right, here are the nuts and bolts. Your target is always going to be a single, dozen, or column. The trigger, and this is crucial, is waiting for 10 straight misses. Once that happens, you start betting using the Fibonacci sequence, where each new bet is the sum of the 2 before it. So you start with 1 unit, then 1, then 2, then 3, 5, and on and on. But wait, why Fibonacci? Why not the more famous martingale system, where you just double your bet every time you lose? While it's all about managing your risk, martingale is like a high-stakes sprint that can wipe out your entire bankroll in a heartbeat. Fibonacci, on the other hand, is a slow burn. It's way less aggressive, and it's built to survive those long, frustrating losing streaks, while still making sure you recover all your losses plus a profit when you finally win. Okay, I know what you're probably thinking right now. What about the 0, that little green pocket that messes everything up in European roulette? Does it reset the count? The answer is actually super simple and logical. Since your bet is on a dozen, a 0 is a loss for you, right? So it just counts as another miss. It doesn't break the streak, it actually continues it. It gets you 1 spin closer to that 10 miss trigger. Okay, enough with the theory. It all sounds good, but let's walk through a real-world example to see exactly how this ambush plays out at the table. So picture this. You're at the table just watching. For 9 spins in a row, the ball lands in either dozen 1 or dozen 3. Dozen 2 is ice cold. Then, on the very next spin, the ball lands on 0. Well, according to our rules, that's a miss. So bingo, we now have 10 confirmed misses. The trigger has been pulled. It's go time. We step in and place our first bet. 1 unit. Let's just say $1 to keep it simple. And nope, it's a miss. The ball lands in dozen 1,
The giant is definitely still sleeping. No panic, this is part of the plan. We follow the sequence. The second number in Fibonacci is also 1, so our second bet is another $1. And another loss. This time, dozen 3 hits. We're now $2 in the hole. And poor dozen 2 has missed a whopping 12 times in a row. Okay, now the progression really kicks in. The next number in the sequence is 2, so our bet goes up to $2. And there it is. The ball lands on 14. Dozen 2 finally wakes up. That's the win we were patiently waiting for. Now let's do the math, because this is the most important part. We spent a grand total of $4 on those 3 bets. Our winning $2 bet paid out 2-1, which means we got $6 back. So we cover the $4 we spent, and we walk away with a $2 net profit. The system did its job. It absorbed the losses and still came out ahead. So that magic number 10. Why 10 misses? Why not jump in at 6 or wait until 12? Well, that trigger point wasn't just pulled out of a hat. It's based on a massive data analysis. This chart pretty much says it all. See that big red bar on the left? That's the risk you're taking if you jump in at only 6 misses. You're still deep in that random noise territory. Now, waiting for 12 misses is much safer, but you might be waiting all night. See that yellow bar in the middle at 10 misses? That's the sweet spot. It's the best possible balance between finding an opportunity and staying safe. And here's the hard data to back it up. If you're betting with a $1 base unit and you use that 10 miss trigger, you should have a bankroll of around $1,100. Why so much? Because that gives you enough firepower to survive a crazy losing streak of about 25 total misses. An event like that is so statistically rare, it almost never happens, which gives you the absolute best chance of walking away a winner. So, at the end of the day, it all boils down to this one powerful idea. This strategy isn't about chasing streaks or trying to guess what's due. It's about having the incredible patience to wait for a real statistical opportunity to show up, and then having the discipline to ambush it with a plan. The only question left is, do you have the discipline to wait? Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the martingale strategy. You know the one. It's legendary for, well, basically for blowing up people's bankrolls. But what if there's a way to tame this beast? We're going to look at a pretty radical idea from our source material that completely flips the script. It argues the real secret isn't how you bet, but how long you're willing to wait. So let's just jump right in with a big question. Could the world's most dangerous betting system actually be a winning one? I know, it sounds crazy, right? This thing is famous for bankrupting players. But the source material we're digging into today, it suggests the answer is a surprising yes. But, and this is a big but, only if you totally rethink how you approach it. All right, first things first, a quick refresher on what we're even talking about. The martingale strategy is honestly brutally simple. You make a bet, say on red in roulette. If you lose, you just double your bet. You keep doubling it after every loss until, bam, you finally get a win. And that one win is supposed to cover all your previous losses, plus give you a profit equal to whatever your first bet was. Sounds foolproof, right? In theory, it can't lose. Yeah, in theory. But in the real world, there's a massive catch. And this quote, it just nails it. Eventually, you will hit a streak that wipes you out. Because a long enough losing streak is going to do one of two things. Either you run out of money completely, or you smash right into the table's betting limit. Either way, it's a catastrophic loss. And that's why the system has such a terrifying reputation. So the big question is, how do you get around this fatal flaw? Well, to understand that, we have to look at a really interesting statistical quirk, what our source material calls the coin flip paradox. And trust me, this is the absolute core concept that this whole modified strategy is built on. Just think about it for a second. Imagine you're flipping a coin, say, 100 times. You're not going to get a perfect, neat little pattern of heads, tails, heads, tails. No way. You're going to get chaos. And more importantly, you are going to get streaks. You know, seeing 7 heads in a row might feel totally impossible if you're just flipping it a few times. But over the long haul, over enough flips, it's not just possible, it's pretty much guaranteed to happen. And guess what? This exact same principle applies at the casino. Those even money bets in roulette, you know, red versus black, even versus odd, they behave just like a coin flip. They're not perfectly balanced from one spin to the next. They create the exact same kind of improbable seeming streaks. And while most people at the table start to panic when they see a long streak, this system sees an opportunity. Okay, so how on earth does this strategy take a dangerous streak and turn it into a calculated opportunity? The answer, in one word, is discipline. Instead of jumping in and fighting the streak right from the start, you do the opposite. You wait. You wait for a very, very specific trigger point. All right, let's break down how this actually works. It's a really simple 4-step process, and it's all about discipline. Step 1, you just watch. You monitor all 6 of those even money options, but you don't put a single dollar on the table. Step 2, and this is the most important part, you wait. You're looking for one of those options to miss 9 times in a row. That's it, that's your trigger. Only then, for step 3, do you actually start the martingale betting. And the final rule, step 4, is absolutely critical. The moment you get that first win, you stop. You're done. Now you might be wondering, what about the green zero? You know, the house edge. The system has a really clever way of dealing with this. The zero is basically the enemy of any even money bet. So if you're tracking red, for example, and the ball lands on 0, it's not a neutral event, it's a miss. It counts as a loss for your tracking, just like if black had hit. And this actually helps you, because it makes it easier for those missed streaks to get longer and hit your trigger. Okay, let's make this real. Let's walk through a live scenario. Imagine you're at the table, you're tracking the results for even and odd, and you start to see something interesting happening. Okay, so for 7 spins in a row, the ball lands on an even number, 7. You can feel the energy at the table shift, right? People are starting to whisper, they're convinced odd is due to hit. The miscount for odd is now at 7. But you do absolutely nothing. You just watch. All right, here comes the 8th spin, and the ball lands on 0. Now, remember our protocol. 0 isn't odd, so that counts as another miss. The streak continues. The miscount for odd is now up to 8. And still, you do nothing. You just wait. And then on the 9th spin, boom, another even number. The streak has now officially hit 9 misses in a row for odd. That is the signal. That's what you've been waiting for this whole time. The statistical anomaly, as the source calls it, has matured. And right there, that's the moment. The trigger is activated. The strategy flips from just watching to actually betting. Now it's time to get your chips ready. Okay, so on spin number 10, you place your first bet, a small $1 bet on odd, and it lands on even, a loss. The miss streak is now at 10. But that's okay, no problem. You just follow the martingale rule. You double your bet to $2 on odd for the next spin. And this time, bang, it hits. A win. So let's do the quick math here. You spent a total of $3 over those 2 bets. Your $2 win paid you $4. That's a net profit of $1. And the whole point here, the big takeaway, is that you waited for the streak to get old and tired, you minimized your own risk, and you walked away with a profit after just 2 small bets. Now, I know what you're thinking. That sounds great in one perfect example, but why 9? Why is 9 the magic number? Well, it's not just a random number they picked out of a hat. The data analysis in the source material points to a very specific sweet spot, right between being way too reckless and being way too conservative. Which brings us to the big question, right? What is so special about the number 9? I mean, if waiting is the key, why not jump in earlier? Say after just 4 misses. You'd get a lot more chances to bet. Or, on the flip side, to be even safer, why not wait for a streak of 12? Well, this chart from the source really lays it all out. If you start your betting after only 4 misses, that's in the extreme risk zone. Why? Because streaks of 12 or 13, which would wipe you out, happen all the time. But waiting for 12 misses, yeah, that's ultra low risk, but you might be sitting at that table for days, maybe even weeks, before you get a single trigger to bet on. It's just not practical. So 9 is that perfect sweet spot. A streak of 9 misses is statistically uncommon. It's a strong signal that a reversal is likely on its way. And here's the most important part.
By waiting until 9, your martingale progression has enough firepower to survive a total streak that goes all the way up to 18 or even 19 spins long. And streaks longer than that, well, those are considered super rare black swan events. The risk is still there, but it's incredibly small. And all of this really brings us back to the core philosophy of this whole thing. It's not really a betting strategy at all. It's a waiting strategy. You know, this quote from the source material, I think it just perfectly reframes the whole debate. For literally decades, everyone has blamed the martingale system itself for being too dangerous. But this way of thinking argues we've been pointing the finger at the wrong thing. The problem isn't the math of doubling your bet. The problem is impatience. It's human psychology. And this change in perspective is everything. Think about it. With standard martingale, you're fighting an unpredictable streak right from the very beginning. You're taking all the risk. But with this wait 9 strategy, you're letting the casino absorb the most dangerous part of the streak. You're not fighting a fresh new pattern. You're stepping in at the end to fight an old, tired anomaly that statistically is due for correction. So, this leaves us with one last big idea to chew on. Is the real gamble even happening on the roulette wheel anymore? Or is the real gamble on your own discipline? This whole strategy suggests that maybe the biggest factor isn't chance at all. It's whether or not you have the patience to wait for the exact right moment to make your move. All right, welcome back. Today, we're going to dive into a gambling strategy that, honestly, it feels completely backward. It's a system that's backed by a ton of data, but it has you betting against the one thing everyone else in the casino is chasing, that red-hot winning streak. So, how does this actually work? Let's get into it. Okay, so just imagine this for a second. You're at the roulette table, right? And the first dozen has just hit 5, 6, maybe even 7 times in a row. You can feel the energy, the crowd is going wild, and every single bone in your body is screaming, get in on that, ride the wave. But is that really the smart move? Is that what the math tells us to do? That's the big question we're gonna break down right now. All right, so to really get why betting against a streak might actually be the winning play, we first have to talk about this little trick our brains play on us. It's a super common cognitive bias, and it's called the hot hand fallacy. And here's the thing, the definition itself is pretty simple, right? It's this mistaken belief that past success somehow predicts future success in a random event. But man, is it hard for our brains to actually buy into that. In a game like roulette, you have to remember, the wheel has zero memory, none. Each spin is a totally clean slate. The ball has no idea that it just landed in the first dozen 7 times in a row. So thinking it's hot or due to hit again, that right there is the fallacy doing its work on you. And that's what happens, right? Pretty much everyone's first instinct is to see that streak and just ride the wave. You want to chase that heat. It's exciting. It feels like the right thing to do, but it totally flies in the face of the actual math. The strategy we're looking at today does the complete opposite. It waits for that little fire to turn into a full-blown inferno, and then it calmly places a bet that it's about to fizzle out. So yeah, that leads us right into the heart of this whole approach. It's all about being a contrarian. Instead of jumping in and joining the party, you actually become the cooler. You know, that person at the table who's just calmly waiting, betting that the hot streak is just about to end. And this really breaks down the difference in thinking. You've got the common player on one side, right? They're all about chasing the heat, hoping and praying that this crazy, unlikely streak keeps going. But then you've got the DE2D cooler. This player is patient. They see the streak for what it is, a statistical blip, and they make a cold, calculated bet that things are about to go back to normal. You know, back to the average. Okay, so you're probably wondering, how does this actually work? Like, what are the rules? And that's a great question, because this isn't just some vague idea. It's a very specific system with very clear steps. So let's break down the mechanics of what they call the wait, 8 ambush. It really just boils down to 3 steps. It's pretty straightforward. Step 1, you monitor. You just watch the board, patiently waiting for a single dozen or column to hit 8, yes, 8 consecutive times. Step 2, you attack. But here's the twist. You don't bet on that streak.
you bet on the other 2 dozens or columns. And step 3, you progress. Now, if you lose, meaning that insane streak continues, you use a simple 139 multiplier for your next bet. Basically, you just triple your bet to cover your loss and still hit your profit target when you eventually win. Let's actually walk through an example so you can see how this plays out. So let's say column 1 hits for the 8th time in a row. Bam! The trigger is pulled. On the very next spin, spin number 9, you bet $2, one on column 2 and one on column 3. And oh no, the unthinkable happens. Column 1 hits again, a 9th time. So you're down $2. Now, this is where most people would panic, but not you. You stick to the system. On spin 10, you progress your bet to $6. And boom, column 2 hits. You win. And after you cover that initial $2 loss, you're left with a $1 profit. See how that works? Discipline pays off. Okay, but what about the 0? That's a super important rule we have to cover. In this system, the logic is really simple. A 0 is a total reset. Think about it. It's not in any of the dozens or columns, so it automatically breaks the streak. So let's say you're waiting for hit number 8 and a 0 pops up. Well, your ambush is off. The count goes back to 0. But if you've already placed your bet and then the 0 hits, that's just counted as a loss. You take the hit and move to the next step in your betting progression. Simple as that. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why 8? Why that specific number? Why not 5? Why not 10? It feels a little random, right? Well, it's not. The number 8 wasn't just pulled out of thin air. It's actually the result of a lot of data crunching. Get this. The people who came up with this system analyzed a massive data set. We're talking 5 million roulette spins. All of that was to find the absolute perfect trigger point, that ideal balance point between risk and opportunity. And this chart really tells the whole story. If you jump in at a streak of 5, look at that. It's super high risk. Streaks of 5 happen all the time, so you'd be risking your money way too often. Now, what if you wait for a streak of 10? Well, the risk is super low for sure, but a streak of 10 is like a unicorn. It's so rare you might wait forever. And that's why 8 is the sweet spot. It's the perfect middle ground, rare enough to signal a real statistical anomaly, but it still happens often enough for you to actually use the strategy. And that's really the whole idea behind it. By being patient and just waiting for that 8-streak trigger, you avoid all the noise, all the churn of those shorter, more common streaks. You're saving your money, you're conserving your bankroll, and you only put it on the table when the odds have really, truly shifted in your favor. You know, all this talk about statistics and probability can get a little abstract. The big idea we're talking about here is called regression to the mean. But let's forget the fancy terms. I'm going to give you a really simple metaphor that'll make this concept stick in your head for good. Let's talk about the rubber band effect. The people who created this system summed up the whole philosophy with this one perfect line. I love this. Don't bet on the stretch, bet on the snap. It just perfectly captures everything we've been talking about. So what exactly does that mean? Let's break it down. I want you to picture a rubber band, okay? Every single time the same dozen hits in a row, it's like you're stretching that rubber band just a little bit more. A streak of 3, a streak of 5. You're pulling it further and further away from where it wants to be, from its normal state. And with every single pull, this statistical tension is building up. So by the time you get to a streak of 8, that rubber band is stretched tight. I mean, it's at an extreme point. Could it possibly stretch to 9? I mean, maybe, but the tension, the overwhelming need for it to snap back to where it belongs, is just becoming immense. The chance of a correction is getting bigger and bigger with every stretch. And that is what you're betting on. That's the whole system. It's not magic, it's not a hunch, it's a cold, hard, calculated bet on that inevitable snapback. You're putting your money on the simple fact that a rubber band can't stretch forever. Eventually, it has to return to its normal state. That snap, that's regression to the mean, right there in action. So at the end of the day, it really just comes down to this one question. When the pressure's on, the crowd is going nuts, and your gut is screaming at you to follow the hot streak, what are you going to trust? Are you going to bet with that feeling? Or are you going to bet with the math? That's really the choice at the heart of this entire strategy. Thanks for digging into this with me today.
You ever been watching a game of chance and you get that little spark of recognition? You know, a sequence of events that just feels familiar? It's this powerful instinct, right? To want to bet on that pattern. But what if the real secret is to bet against it? Today, we're going to flip that entire instinct on its head.
It's this thing called the déjà vu effect. It's that gut feeling that you know what's coming next because you swear you've seen this exact same thing happen before. And it gives you this powerful, illusion of control. And our first impulse is always to bet that that pattern is going to hold. And that is the core idea we're digging into here. The real edge, the real advantage, isn't found in predicting a perfect repeat. No, it's found in betting on a mathematical certainty. That all of these improbable, crazy patterns, they eventually break. You're betting on the chaos. So this brings us to a strategy that's called anti-betting. And you can forget your crystal balls, forget your lucky feelings. This is a cold, calculated philosophy. It's all about leveraging the simple, powerful math of improbability and betting that history is not going to repeat itself perfectly.
Okay, so what exactly is anti-betting? Well, think of it like this. First, you use data to find a really rare moment where it looks like history is repeating itself. Then, you place your bet on a very simple premise, that this repetition is a total fluke. In essence, you're betting on the universe to do what it does best, return to chaos.
So what's the playbook here? It's actually a surprisingly simple 4-step process. First, you track what's happening live. Then, you scan all the past data looking for a perfect match to what you're seeing now. Step 3, you find out what happened next in that old historical pattern. And finally, step 4, you bet against that exact same thing happening again. It's methodical, it's disciplined, and it has nothing to do with luck. It's all data.
Theory is great and all, but let's make this real. We're going to walk through a live scenario, moment by moment, so you can see exactly how an anti-bet gets placed.
All right, so picture this. You're tracking a roulette wheel. Not the numbers, but which dozen the ball lands in, D1, D2, or D3. And the last 6 spins have created this specific sequence. Dozen 1, then 3, 1, 2, 3, and 1 again. Right now, it just looks like a random string of outcomes, right? But this is where the system goes to work. It starts crunching through all the historical data, scanning thousands of previous spins, and then bam, it gets a hit. It finds a perfect match. 200 spins ago, this exact same 6-spin sequence happened. This is that déjà vu moment the entire strategy is built to find.
Now, for the most important piece of the puzzle. The system looks at what happened right after that sequence 200 spins ago. Well, the very next spin, the 7th one in that old pattern, was dozen 2. It's like history is showing you a ghost, a potential roadmap for what's about to happen.
And this is where you face a choice. A conventional player, a follower, they see this and bet on dozen 2, hoping history repeats itself. But the anti-bet player, they do the exact opposite. They bet against dozen 2, putting their money on the far more likely outcome, that this perfect, beautiful little pattern is about to break. So, you might be wondering, why a pattern of this length? Why not shorter? Why not longer? Well, this is where the math gets really, really interesting. Turns out there's a statistical sweet spot that makes this whole thing work, and it all revolves around the number 7. Let's start with a really short pattern. The odds of a 4-spin sequence repeating? It's just 1 in 81. I mean, this happens constantly. It's statistically meaningless. It's just noise. Betting against something that common gives you no real edge. Okay, now let's jump to the other extreme. A 9-spin pattern repeating itself, the odds are almost 1 in 20,000. This is what you'd call a black swan event. It is so incredibly rare that you could wait forever and literally never see the trigger to place a bet. It's just not practical. And that brings us right to the mathematical sweet spot. The odds of a 7-spin pattern repeating are 1 in 2,187. Now that is the magic number. It's rare enough that seeing it is a major statistical event, but it's common enough that you'll actually get chances to bet on it. It is the perfect balance between rare and real. So let's just break this down. A 4-spin pattern? That's high risk because it's just noise. A 9-spin pattern? That's a ghost. An ultra-low risk event you'll probably never even see. But a 7-spin pattern? That is the optimized zone. It's a rare event that, when it shows up,
gives you a true statistical edge when you bet that the pattern is going to break on that 8th step.
And this takes us beyond just the numbers and really into the core philosophy that makes this strategy tick. See, it's not about outsmarting the wheel. It's about understanding its fundamental nature.
And here is the fundamental truth, the one thing that powers this entire idea. The wheel isn't thinking, it's a machine. It's governed by physics. It has no memory of the last spin, let alone a spin from hours ago. So any pattern you think you see, it isn't a message, it's just a coincidence.
And that is the absolute key distinction. This strategy is not about predicting the future. It's about seeing an improbable coincidence for what it is, a fluke. You are simply betting on the overwhelming mathematical probability that this incredibly rare event is not going to happen a second time in a row.
So, at the end of the day, the bet you're placing isn't really on dozen 1 or dozen 3. It's a bet on probability itself, a bet against a ghost in the machine. And that leaves us with one heck of a final question. In a world of random outcomes, where do you put your faith? In the illusion of a pattern or in the fundamental nature of chaos? All right, today we're going to dive into a really fascinating roulette strategy. It's called the Voisins du Zero trap. This is all about patience, watching the table, and then betting on a statistical weirdness to correct itself. So how on earth does it work? So it all kicks off with something you might see at the table that just feels off. You're watching spin after spin, and you notice the ball is just completely avoiding this huge chunk of the wheel, over and over again. So what does that actually mean? Well, in the short term, this creates what the source material calls a statistical vacuum. Look, we all know that over thousands of spins, the ball should land everywhere pretty evenly. But when it doesn't for a stretch, it creates this temporary imbalance. And that imbalance, that's the opportunity. To really get what this vacuum is, we have to get to know the specific part of the wheel that's at the center of this whole strategy. So let's meet the Voisins du Zéro, or as it translates, the neighbors of zero. Now, if you're not familiar with this, don't worry. Voisins du Zéro is a classic French bet. You're not just betting on one number. Nope, you're betting on a big group of 17 numbers that are all physically right next to each other on the wheel, with that green zero right in the middle of them. And here's why it's such a big deal. Just look at the scale of this thing. The Voisins du Zéro sector covers almost 46% of a European roulette wheel. That's huge. It's nearly half of all the possible places the ball can land. So statistically, you'd expect the ball to hit here, on average, almost every other spin. And here they are, the whole neighborhood of numbers. We're talking about a massive connected block on the wheels stretching all the way from the number 22 around past 0 to the number 25. You don't have to memorize all of them. Just get this, when this entire group goes missing in action. That's the key. Okay, so here's the most important part. This is not a strategy where you just blindly bet on this sector over and over and hope for the best. No way. This is a game of patience. You wait. You wait for a very specific signal before you even think about putting a chip on the table. And that signal? It's the 6-spin trigger. The process itself is really methodical. You just watch. You're not betting, you're just tracking. And for every single spin, you're asking one simple question. Did the ball land in that 17 number Voisins area? And you just count every miss in a row. You do absolutely nothing until that count hits 6. So, the moment that condition is met, the waiting game is over. That statistical vacuum we talked about,
It's now confirmed. And now it's time to act. It's time to spring the trap. Okay, let's walk through it like we're at the table. Spin 1, the ball lands on 1. That's a miss. Spin 2, it hits 6. Another miss. Then comes 33, then 14, then 31. That's 5 spins in a row where the Voisin sector has been a ghost town. Then that 6th spin comes, the ball lands on 9. That is another miss.
And that's it, right there. 6 misses in a row. That absolutely massive 45.9% chunk of the wheel has been completely ignored 6 straight times. The trigger has officially fired. The trap is set.
Now, and only now, do you actually make your bet. And to cover this entire sector, the Voisin's bed takes a total of 9 chips. As you can probably guess, this is a pretty expensive bet, which is exactly why the strategy says you have to wait for such a strong signal before you risk your money.
Oh, but there's a really important rule about the number 0. Since 0 is the heart of the Voisin sector, if the ball lands on it at any point while you're counting up to 6, the whole thing is off. The count immediately resets to 0. The trap is canceled. The entire neighborhood has to be silent before you make your move.
So this kind of raises a question, right? Why exactly 6 spins? Why not 4? Or maybe 10? Well, the answer really comes down to balancing risk and reward, which the source material breaks down by looking at 2 classic player styles, the grinder and the sniper. And this table just lays it all out perfectly. You've got the grinder, who bets after only 4 misses. Yeah, it happens more often, but it's a bit riskier and can chew through your bankroll. Then, all the way at the other end, you have the sniper, who waits for 12 misses. I mean, that's incredibly safe, but it's so rare you might never even make a bet. And right there in the middle, that's our sweet spot, 6 misses. It's the perfect balance of managing risk while still getting a realistic chance to play when that sector is, in theory, due to hit. You know, beyond all the numbers and the mechanics, there's a real philosophy that holds this whole idea together. The source material calls it a belief that sooner or later, the ball always goes home.
A great way to think about it is that the Voisin sector is like the North Pole of the roulette wheel. It is the single biggest target. So when you see it miss 6, 7, even 8 times in a row, it just feels unnatural. Because statistically, it is unnatural. It's like the ball is dancing all around the edges, but it can't avoid its magnetic north forever.
And this line just sums up the entire mindset perfectly. You aren't just betting on numbers, you're betting on the ball finally going home. You've waited patiently for a whole section of the wheel to get starved for a hit. You're making a disciplined bet that probability is finally about to snap back to where it should be. Which really leads us to the final thought here. The Voisin's trap, it's a really cool system of patience and triggers, but is it a true winning strategy? One that might exploit some tiny bias in a wheel? Or is it just a very clever, very disciplined, and kind of dramatic way to bet on the law of averages eventually doing its thing? That's definitely something to think about.
All right, let's get into it. Today, we're breaking down a really fascinating roulette strategy. And the cool thing is, it frames the game less like a game of luck and more like a strategic heist. It's all about patience, observation, and knowing exactly when to strike.
So that's the big question, right? Can you actually outsmart a game of pure chance? Now, tons of betting systems claim they can, but the one we're looking at today has a pretty unique answer. It's not about controlling the ball, it's about controlling when you decide to play. And that right there is the key. Instead of trying to just force a win and fight the house edge, this whole system is built on patience. You're letting the wheel do its thing, you're watching, and you're waiting for a very, very specific signal before you even think about putting a chip on the table.
Okay, so to really get the plan, you gotta stop seeing the roulette wheel as just a spinning disc. Think of it more like a map, a battlefield with competing territories. And each one of those territories has its own tactical importance.
Here's the lay of the land. The wheel is split into 3 main zones. First, you've got the voisin du zero, which means neighbors of 0. That's a big 17-number section, and for our heist, that's the enemy's stronghold. Our targets? They're the other 2 zones, the tiers and the orphelins. Together, they are the prize we're waiting to snatch.
You know, every good heist has a major obstacle, right? Like a vault that's almost impossible to crack. Well, in this strategy, that obstacle has a name, the voisin's power trip. And this is the exact moment where the game usually turns against most players.
So here's the problem. Sometimes it feels like the ball just gets stuck. It gets magnetically pulled into that voisin sector, spin after spin after spin. And if you're betting on any of the other numbers, well, it's an absolute nightmare. It can wipe out your entire bankroll in just a few minutes. And look, this is a real-world example. For 7 spins in a row, the ball landed only in that voisin's territory. It completely ignored more than half the numbers on the wheel. This is the exact kind of streak that drives players crazy and broke.
So how does our master plan deal with this? Well, here's the beautiful part. It doesn't fight the power trip. Not at all. It actually lets it happen. And while the enemy is on its winning streak, our plan is quietly forming a massive alliance to take advantage of what comes next.
The blueprint is actually pretty simple. You take those 2 other sectors, the tiers and the orphans, and you combine them into one single unit, a grand alliance. This creates this huge trap of numbers that covers the entire other side of the wheel, just waiting.
So this alliance we've built, it covers a grand total of 20 distinct numbers. We're not just picking a handful of lucky numbers anymore. No, we're betting on a massive piece of territory.
And here's why that is so crucial. 20 numbers is over half the wheel. We're talking 54% to be exact. So when you bet on this alliance, you are mathematically speaking, betting on the majority. And you'd have to think, eventually, the majority has to win.
All right, the alliance is formed, the trap is set. But this whole heist is about one thing, timing. The alliance doesn't just attack randomly. It waits, patiently, hiding in the shadows, for a very specific signal to launch the whole operation. And that signal is the trigger. And what is the trigger? It's that 7-spin voisin streak we just saw. The entire strategy is to just wait until that unlikely event happens. The idea is that while every spin is random, a long streak like that makes a hit on the other half of the wheel, our alliance, statistically overdue.
Now, here's a really interesting little detail. In this plan, the number 0 is basically treated as an enemy combatant. Why? Because it lives inside the voisin sector. So a hit on 0 is a miss for our alliance. But, and here's the twist, that miss actually helps us. It just builds the pressure and gets us one step closer to our 7-spin trigger. So the plan of action is dead simple. Step 1, you identify that 7-spin streak. You're just watching. Step 2, the moment it happens, the alert fires. That's your signal. And step 3, you attack. This means placing a very specific 11-unit bet. A unit is just whatever your normal bet size is, and those 11 units are spread out in a way that covers all 20 of our allied numbers. But you might be asking, why 7 misses? Why not 4 or 10 or 12? Well, this is where the strategy gets flexible. It actually has different risk profiles, so you can decide if you want to be a cautious planner or a bold field agent. You can actually adjust your entry point based on your appetite for risk. If you wait for just 4 misses, that's the aggressive action approach. If you wait for a whopping 12 misses, that's the super cautious safety first option. But you could be waiting a very long time for that. The recommended 7-miss trigger is called the sweet spot because it perfectly balances the odds of it happening with the cost of that 11-unit bet you're about to place. You know, when you boil it all down, the philosophy behind this whole plan is captured perfectly right here. It's not about fighting the current, it's about waiting for the tide to turn. It's patience over power and pure strategy over blind superstition. And that leaves us with one final thought. Is a system that patiently waits for these statistical quirks to happen really outsmarting the game? Or is it just telling a really compelling story about how we, as humans, try to find patterns in randomness? The answer, a lot like that little white ball, is always in motion. All right, today we're going to talk about the roulette wheel, but we're going to do something a little different. We're going to completely ignore the numbers. Instead, we're diving into a pretty advanced strategy that's all about the physics of the wheel itself. It's about finding a hidden pattern where most people just see, pure chaos. I mean, that's the big question, isn't it? Can you actually find a real repeatable pattern in the beautiful chaos of a spinning roulette wheel? Most players, they tell you, no way. But what if the pattern isn't in the numbers that pop up? What if it's in the physical behavior of the wheel? And this quote right here, it just nails it. The secret we're digging into today, it's not on that green felt betting grid. Nope, it is in the wheel, the actual physical object, which has its own tendencies, its own quirks, and patterns that start to show up over time. So the main idea here is surprisingly simple. Just imagine drawing a line straight down, right from the zero. That one single line splits the entire world of the roulette wheel into two halves, two separate hemispheres, a left side and a right side. Okay, so let's actually look at these two halves. Over on the left, you've got numbers like 26, 3, and 35. On the right, you see 32, 15, and 19. Now, it's really important to get this. This isn't just some random grouping. This is literally how the numbers sit next to each other on the physical wheel. This right here, this is our map. And that brings us to the strategy itself. It's called the hemisphere vacuum. And the theory behind it, it's pretty simple really. Over a ton of spins, the ball should land on both halves pretty evenly. But when it doesn't, when one side just goes cold for a while, well, that creates an imbalance, a vacuum that physics and probability are just itching to correct. This imbalance has a name. It's called the hemisphere trap. And listen, this is way more than just a bad streak, It's a pattern you can actually spot, where the ball seems almost stuck on one side of the wheel. And that tells us that the other side is being totally neglected, creating that vacuum we're looking for. All right, so how do you actually use this? Well, this isn't about guesswork or hunches. It's a very clear step-by-step process. It's all about spotting that vacuum and knowing the precise moment to make your move. The whole thing breaks down into 4 simple steps. First, you track. You're just watching, looking for a streak where the ball keeps hitting the right side. Second, you wait. You're waiting for the left side to miss a specific number of times. Third, that count creates a trigger, a signal to act. And finally, you attack by betting on that entire left hemisphere. So what's the magic number? What's the trigger? It's 5. The default trigger point for this whole strategy is 5 consecutive spins where the ball completely misses the left hemisphere.
But before we get into why 5 is the number, there's one more really important rule we gotta cover.
And that's the zero protocol. The easiest way to think about this is that 0 is like the North Pole. It doesn't belong to the left or the right. It's a neutral zone. So if the ball lands on 0 while you're counting, it counts as a miss for the side you're waiting for. What this does, see, is it actually helps you build that count of 5 misses, acting as a nice little safety buffer. Okay, let's play this out. Imagine you're at the table right now, just watching. The dealer spins. The ball lands on 32, then 15, then 4, then 2. Now, if we look at our map, we know every single one of those numbers is planted firmly on the right side of the wheel. The left side has now missed 4 times in a row. Then comes the 5th spin. The ball clicks around and settles on 25, another number on the right side. And there it is. That's the moment. The status just changed. The left hemisphere has now officially missed 5 consecutive times.
The trigger is fired. So on that very next spin, spin number 6, you do it. You place your bets to cover that entire arc of numbers on the left. The dealer lets the ball go, and it comes to rest on 29, a number deep in the left hemisphere. And that's a win.
But that brings us right back to that big question. Why 5? Why not 4, or 6, or even 12? Well, the number isn't just pulled out of a hat. It's a calculated decision based on a whole lot of data to find the absolute best moment to jump in.
So let's break this down. If you jump in after only 4 misses, you're being too aggressive. A streak of 4 happens all the time. It's just random noise. On the other hand, if you wait for 12 misses, you're in what's called ghost territory. A streak that long is so incredibly rare, it might just mean the wheel is broken. 5 misses, though, that's the sweet spot. It's the perfect balance. It waits just long enough for that short-term randomness to fade, signaling a real imbalance is likely happening.
So at the end of the day, what are we really talking about here? It's a completely new way of looking at the game. This isn't about trying to predict a specific number. It's about recognizing a physical imbalance and making a bet that the laws of physics are going to step in and correct it. You know, the best way to really visualize this whole thing is to stop thinking about a roulette wheel for a second. Instead, just imagine a pendulum. It swings left, it swings right. Sure, it might hang out on one side for a little bit, but it can't stay there forever, right? Eventually, it has to swing back.
And that quote right there, that's it. That's the whole strategy in a nutshell. After watching the wheel hit the right side for 5 spins in a row, you're not making some wild guess. You are simply and calmly placing a bet to catch that pendulum as it inevitably swings back to the other side. Which really leaves us with one last question to think about. Is this a real strategy that gives you an edge? Or is it just a more disciplined, physics-based way to watch randomness do its thing? Are you beating the odds, or are you just understanding them on a whole different level? Something to chew on.
All right, let's talk roulette. But I want you to forget everything you think you know.
Forget lucky numbers, forget betting on your birthday. All that stuff is out the window. Today, we're diving into a strategy that's all about physics, not superstition, and it's called the mirror trap. So let me just start with this one question, because it really turns the whole game on its head. What if winning at roulette just wasn't about luck at all? Seriously, what if there was a predictable force at play, something hiding right there in plain sight? So what is that predictable force? Well, it's geometry. Yeah, you heard me right. See, with this, we're not betting on numbers. We're betting on the actual physical properties of the wheel and the dealer's own rhythm. And that, well, that changes everything. So let's get into the physics behind the bet. At its absolute heart, this whole strategy is really a bet against perfection. It's a bet that a dealer, no matter how consistent they are, can't physically keep landing the ball in the same 180-degree half of the wheel forever. It's just not possible. Sooner or later, the laws of physics, variance, and simple ball scatter, the way the ball naturally bounces around, it's going to demand a correction. And this is where it gets really interesting. We have to completely reframe how we see the wheel. Forget the individual numbers for a second. Instead, just think of the wheel as two competing territories, a left hemisphere and a right hemisphere. Now, if a dealer gets kind of stuck in a physical rhythm, hitting the left side over and over again, the right side becomes what the strategy calls a barren wasteland, and that creates a physical imbalance that physics just hates. It simply has to correct itself. And that imbalance, that's the whole key. That is what the mirror trap is all about. It's designed to spot and then exploit something very specific, what it calls the right side vacuum. So what in the world is a right side vacuum? It's actually pretty simple. It's what gets created when the ball repeatedly, spin after spin, misses that entire half of the wheel. And this isn't just some statistical fluke, it's a physical one. This vacuum creates a kind of powerful pull, a really high probability that the ball will soon land there just to restore the wheel's natural balance. And look, this isn't some vague concept. These are the exact numbers. This is the battlefield we are watching. These 18 numbers make up that right side territory. So we are targeting this precise arc of the wheel, which, by the way, covers about 48.6% of the numbers. Okay, but you're probably wondering, what about the zero? And this is absolutely critical. Since zero isn't part of our right side territory, it's counted as a miss. So think about that for a second. Every single time the ball lands on zero, it actually increases the pressure inside that vacuum, making the eventual correction even more likely. So here's the crucial question, right? When do you act? You can't just be betting all the time. That's a surefire way to lose your shirt. You need a signal. And this strategy uses a very specific trigger to tell you when that physical imbalance is strong enough to finally bet on. Let's walk through how this actually looks in real time. Imagine you're at the table, just watching. For 4 straight spins, the ball lands only on the left side. The right side is completely cold, a ghost town. Then, on the 5th spin, it hit 0. Now, remember our rule. 0 is a miss. That is our trigger. The right side has now been ignored 5 times in a row. So now you act. You place your bets to cover all 18 of those right side numbers. And in this scenario, bam, the ball lands on 10. That's a win. But why 5 spins? Why not 4 or 6 or maybe even 12? Well, the number 5 isn't arbitrary at all. It's a calculated sweet spot, and it's based on a massive amount of data designed to perfectly balance risk and opportunity. And this chart really gives us the breakdown. See, acting after just 4 misses, it's too risky. You'll probably just burn through your bankroll chasing what's essentially random noise. Now, on the other hand, waiting for 12 misses is ultra safe, but it's like a 1 in 4,000 event. You'd almost never get to play. So 5 misses, that is the optimized entry point. It signals a clear physical imbalance, but it happens frequently enough to be a viable strategy. And this all connects back to managing your money. By waiting for that 5-spin trigger, you're basically giving yourself enough financial ammunition to survive a longer than average streak. The data shows that these hemisphere streaks, they tend to run out of gas or exhaust themselves around 8 or 9 misses. So this entry point is designed specifically to help you outlast them. I really love this quote from the system's creator because it just captures the whole thing perfectly. It says, "The DE2D system tells you specifically which side is being neglected.
It ignores the randomness of the table layout and focuses purely on the physics of the wheel. I mean, that's it in a nutshell. It's not a guessing game. It's more like a diagnostic tool. You're ignoring the chaotic jumble of numbers on the betting felt and focusing entirely on the physical reality of that spinning wheel. In the end, the mirror trap really operates on this one simple but incredibly powerful principle. When that trigger fires, it's not saying a specific number is due. Not at all. It's sending a much, much clearer message. The dealer has neglected half the world for too long. And in roulette, the world always demands balance. It's saying one half of that wheel has been neglected, and in a game governed by physics, the world always eventually demands balance.
Today, we're breaking down a roulette strategy that boasts an 81% win rate. I mean, that sounds so good it feels like a cheat code, right? But here's the thing. Hidden inside that promise is a nasty trap that's designed to just drain your bankroll. But stick with me because we are also going to reveal the simple, patient fix that turns that very trap into a weapon.
Okay, let's just start with the number that gets everyone's attention, 81%. Now, on the surface, that number promises safety. It promises consistent wins. But in a game like roulette, what does a number like that really mean?
So here's the proposition, the core idea. What if you could win on 4 out of every 5 spins? I mean, that's the kind of promise that makes players lean in, thinking they've finally found the secret, you know? This is the seductive power of high-coverage betting.
So, how do you even get to 81%? Well, it's actually a lot simpler than you might think. Picture the roulette table. You can basically divide it into 6 blocks of 6 numbers. People call these double streets. The strategy is simple. You bet on 5 of those 6 blocks. Just like that, you're covering 30 of the 37 numbers on the wheel. It's kind of a brute force approach to owning the board.
And this is where the psychology of the game just completely takes over. You're winning and winning and winning. Yeah, the profits are small, we're talking just 1 unit per spin, but they're steady. It creates this powerful illusion of control, right? It makes you feel completely safe from risk. But in a casino, that word almost, well, almost is where bankrolls go to die.
And here's the catch. This seemingly foolproof shield, it has a massive weak spot. The whole strategy feels safe, but it's got a mathematical flaw that can wipe out every penny of your profit in a single spin. Let's break down exactly how that happens.
Look, here's the trap in simple math. On the left, you've got your small, steady wins. After 5 good spins, you're feeling great, you're up 5 units. But look at the right. Because you had to bet 5 units just to win 1, a single loss on one of those numbers you didn't cover cost you all 5 units. Just like that, all your hard work is gone in one brutal spin.
So who's the real villain in this story? It's the 19% of the board you don't cover. That's the 6 numbers in that one double street you left open, and of course, the house's absolute best friend, the green 0. That 19% risk is always lurking, and over time, the pure mathematical edge of that one little 0 ensures the casino will always grind you down.
But what if we could just flip this whole thing on its head? What if instead of grinding it out and just hoping to avoid that 19%, we could wait for a very specific moment to strike? This is where the strategy evolves from a defensive shield into an offensive hammer.
The solution is a pretty radical shift in your approach. You just stop playing every spin. You literally transform from a player into a patient hunter. You watch the board and you wait for a statistical anomaly to show up. Specifically, one 6-number line hitting 4 times in a row. that becomes your trigger to act.
I just love this quote from the source material because it perfectly captures that mindset shift. You're not a grinder anymore. You're waiting for the wheel to show you an imbalance, a clump. You're letting one area of the board act like it owns the table, and then you use that information to bet against it.
Okay, so the theory is one thing, but what does this actually look like in practice? Let's walk through the step-by-step execution of this strategy right at the table.
The blueprint is all about discipline. Step 1, you monitor all 6 lines. Step 2, you wait, patiently. And trust me, this is the hardest part. You wait for a single one of those lines to hit 4 times straight. Step 3, you identify that hot line as your target. And finally, step 4, you attack. You bet on the other 5 lines, basically wagering that this improbable streak is about to break.
All right, let's put ourselves at the table. You're just watching, not betting. First spin, the ball hits 33. That's in line 6. Second spin, it's 35. Line 6 again. Third spin, 31. Still line 6. You can feel the pattern forming, right? Then, on the fourth spin, the ball lands on 36. That's it. 4 consecutive hits on the exact same line. The trigger is pulled.
And that is it. The condition has been met. The alarm bells are going off in your head. It is time to act. You place your bets, covering every single double street on the board except for the one that's been so unnaturally hot, line 6.
The wheel spins again. This time, the ball bounces around and lands on 14, which is over in line 3. Because you covered line 3 as part of your bet, you win. You invested 5 units, you got 6 back, and you walk away with a clean 1 unit profit. See, you didn't just get lucky, you used a statistical anomaly to set up a high probability win.
Now, this brings us to the most important question of all. Why 4 hits? Why not 3 or 5 or 7? Well, this number isn't just arbitrary. It's the statistical sweet spot that was found after analyzing millions of spins. Let's look at the data.
This chart just perfectly illustrates the critical balance between risk and opportunity. If you bet after just 2 hits, what we call the grinder approach, you're playing way too often, and that 19% chance of loss is eventually going to get you. If you wait for a miracle, like 9 hits in a row, the opportunity is so rare you'll probably never even place a bet. 4 hits, that's the sweet spot. It's an event that's statistically significant, but it still happens frequently enough to be a viable strategy.
So just how rare is this trigger we're talking about? Well, the mathematical probability of any specific double street hitting 4 times in a row is a minuscule 0.06%. To put that into perspective, you are more likely to be dealt a full house in poker. This isn't just a pattern, it's a true statistical outlier. You're betting against an event that, by the sheer laws of probability, is overdue to stop. Okay, let's tie it all together. Waiting for 4 hits, make sure you're betting against a genuine statistical anomaly, not just random noise. You're banking on a principle called regression to the mean, which is just a fancy way of saying that extreme events are usually followed by more normal results. And crucially, your 81% coverage acts as this powerful safety net. Even if you lose and that crazy streak continues, you have an incredibly high chance of winning on the very next spin to recover your loss.
You know, ultimately, what this explainer has really been about is more than just a betting tactic. It's a fundamental shift in mindset. It's a complete change in how you approach the game, moving from a brute force grinder to a patient, calculating sniper.
It really all comes down to this comparison. On one side, you've got the grinder, who's constantly on that treadmill, playing every single spin and fighting a losing battle against the house edge. On the other side, you have the sniper, sitting patiently, waiting for that perfect moment to strike, using the natural imbalances of randomness to their advantage.
And that brings us to the final question you should ask yourself. Is your high-coverage betting strategy a shield, one that will inevitably get worn down by the house edge? Or can you, with discipline and patience, turn it into a hammer, ready to strike at precisely the right moment? The choice isn't just about the numbers. It's about what kind of player you really want to be. All right, welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're going to dive into a really fascinating and, well, pretty unconventional strategy from the world of roulette. And this one, it's not about chasing hot numbers or, betting on your birthday. This is about building a statistical trap. So let's just start with the core philosophy here, which comes right from the source material. You see, unlike most systems that are always reacting to the wheel, this one is all about creating its own reality. It doesn't try to fight the wheel. It sets a very specific kind of trap and just patiently waits. And that's the big question, isn't it? I mean, how do you do that? It sounds kind of impossible, right? But this whole strategy is broken down into this really clear mechanical process. So let's just walk through how this thing is built, piece by piece.
First things first, you need to build your team. But here's the twist. You're not the coach who's out there picking your favorite players. No, in this system, you're more like the manager, just letting the wheel itself, through pure random chance, decide who makes the roster.
And this brings us to the absolute key concept, the bucket. I want you to imagine you're just standing there, collecting every unique number the ball lands on and just tossing it into a bucket. You keep doing that until you have exactly 17 different numbers in there. That's it. That collection, that's your target. It's locked in.
So this whole process has two really distinct phases. The first part, the collector phase, is totally passive. You're not betting, you're not doing anything, you're just watching and logging the numbers. But the second that 17th unique number hits, bam, everything changes. The lock phase begins. The list gets frozen, you basically put a lid on that bucket, and your team is now officially set.
Okay, now this is where things get really interesting. The role of the number 0. It's kind of like a chameleon. So if 0 just happens to be one of those first 17 unique numbers you collect, great, it's a hero, it's on your team. But if your bucket gets locked before 0 ever shows up, it becomes an enemy. It's just another number out there that can help trigger your attack. So its allegiance, it's completely dynamic.
All right, so your 17 numbers are locked and loaded. Now what? Well, now comes the part that feels totally wrong. You wait. You don't place a single bet, you just watch, and you count. This is the 6-spin waiting game.
And the rules for this waiting game are super simple. So if the ball lands on one of your 17 numbers, one of your team members, that's what we call a bucket hit. When that happens, the system is considered awake, and any miscount you had resets right back to 0. But if the ball lands on any of the other numbers, that's a bucket miss. The system stays asleep, and the miscount goes up by 1. And what you're waiting for 6 of these misses all in a row.
You know what? Let's make this real. Let's walk through an actual scenario from the source material. So, imagine the wheel's been spinning, and it's filled up our bucket with these 17 unique numbers you see here. The lid is on, that bucket is locked tight. And you'll notice, for this round, 0 actually got collected, so it's a hero on our team. Now, the waiting begins.
All right, here we go. First spin after the lock. It's 36. That's not on our team. So, that's miss number 1.
Next spin, 34. Nope, another miss. The count is now 2.
And then, the number 6. Still nothing from our bucket. That's 3 misses in a row.
The wheel spins again. Lands on 30. We're now at 4 consecutive misses. Okay, the tension is building. The next number is 9. That is 5 straight misses. The trap is getting so close to being set. And there it is. The very next spin is 33. That is the 6th consecutive spin that has completely avoided our 17 numbers. The trigger is officially activated. The wait is over. Okay, so your team has been sleeping for 6 straight spins. The system has finally given you the green light. It is time to spring the trap. Now, the attack itself is super simple. You just bet 1 unit on all 17 of your numbers. But listen, the most critical, absolutely non-negotiable part is what comes next. Once you get a win, you have to dump the bucket. This is not optional. It's the absolute core of the strategy. You wipe the slate completely clean and you start that whole collection process all over again. The real discipline here is resisting that urge to keep betting on what feels like a hot bucket. And here it is, the payoff. So on that very next spin, spin number 32, you go ahead and place your 17 chips, and what happens? The ball lands on the number 2, one of the numbers in your bucket. It's a win. So let's do the math. It cost you $17 to place the bet. The payout is $36, which leaves you with a nice clean profit of $19. And then
You dump the bucket, and you patiently wait for the next opportunity.
Okay, so we've seen the how, but this is maybe the most important part of this whole explainer, the why. I mean, why that specific number? Why wait for 6 misses? It's not just some random number they pulled out of a hat. It's based on a very specific calculation.
So according to the data analysis from the source material, after about 12 consecutive misses, it becomes statistically very, very rare for a set of 17 numbers to not hit. You should think of 12 misses as the absolute danger zone. It's like a statistical hard deck that you really don't want to hit.
But look, statistical rarity is only one half of the equation, right? The other half is the practical side of things, your bankroll. With the typical betting progression, most players can only afford about 6 escalating bets before they're either out of cash or they hit the table limit. These are your 6 bullets in the chamber. And this is where it all just clicks into place. You take that statistical hard deck, the 12 misses, you subtract the 6 bullets that you can actually afford to fire, and what does that leave you with? It leaves you with 6. That's your waiting period. It's a buffer zone, and it's designed to let you enter the attack phase with enough firepower to survive even a longer than expected drought.
So let's bring this whole thing full circle, right back to that idea we started with. You know, this strategy isn't about trying to predict the future. It's about building a structure and then just waiting for the laws of probability to eventually do their thing.
So, what's the ultimate takeaway from all this? Really, it's a mindset. First, you define your territory. That's your bucket of 17 numbers. Then, you wait for that territory to go completely silent, for the wheel to almost forget it even exists. And it's right there, in that statistical silence, that you get the signal to act. It is a fascinating approach that really turns patience itself into your main weapon.